Perfect, thank you so much. So we will get started today. Okay, and if you have any issues, please feel free to use the question box. I'm going to keep that up. This is how we're going to engage. You can engage with the material, you can engage with me, and it's always more exciting when people are kind of typing in and I can hear from you. So we're going to get started today. And I can talk a little bit about the handouts that we have, and then if you're having any other tech issues, then I did add a handout for that. So if you look in the top right of your GoToWebinar, you'll see a control panel, and so you can click on that orange button and it shows you basically all of your settings, and that's where you're going to be able to type in the questions if you haven't already, and you can view the handouts. So there's a PDF of our slides, so you can keep those if you would like. There are some slides on there that would be helpful to print out, as well as a kind of webinar tech question. So if you're having issues with any audio or anything like that, that handout can kind of help with the basic questions. So yes, so that you can get a copy of the PDF, but there won't be a copy of the transcription, though this webinar is recorded. So if you do need to see it later, you can email me and I could try to send it to you, okay? But you definitely have the PDF that is there right now. Okay. And feel free during this time to send me questions. I'll always make sure to check. But firstly, so we're talking about trauma-informed care, and that's been a big buzzword, especially in the mental health community, but it's kind of reached greater audiences lately. But what is it? There's a lot of misconceptions on what it means, but a very basic definition is that it's a framework of beliefs and practices. And so it's understanding what is trauma, the prevalence of trauma, especially in our country, and the effects on mental health, on individuals and communities, as well as recognizing the short and long-term effects. I think some people think of, when they hear trauma, they think PTSD and war, maybe, but there are so many different types. And so really today we're going to be talking about, kind of understanding how can all these different traumas occur and what might you be seeing in the workplace. And so this is all about how HR can learn and adjust some of the policies that they might have, or create new policies to make sure that you have psychological safety in the workplace. So in a broader sense, right, trauma-informed care is about training professionals to aid in traumatized persons, but with a person-centered approach. And so that's what the part we're going to be talking about today is, how do you really make sure that your workplace is person-centered? And when we talk about work culture in the American workforce, it hasn't always been person-centered. So there are some shifts and changes that we're seeing in the modern day. And then lastly, it's about adjusting policies and procedures to make sure that we're not re-traumatizing people or creating a workplace where people's mental health starts to fail. Okay, so there are so many different versions of trauma, and normally, what I see when people talk about it is almost a comparison of traumas of, well, this one is bigger than this one, or yours is worse than mine, right? But trauma can occur in so many different ways, and honestly, for each individual in the community, it's painful either way. So kind of learning about the different ways that trauma can occur so that we can better help those who are traumatized and heal from those effects. So there's emotional, physical, psychological, spiritual, mental, and then through an individual, through families, through communities. And so in today's webinar, we're really talking about the workplace community, but then also in the individual, and what are some things that you can keep your eyes out for yourself, or if you notice in other people. Okay, so in the workplace, right, just some big things. Trauma can occur from sexual harassment, racism, discrimination, workplace accidents, which happens more often than not, but those are the workplace accidents are the surprises. And so that's where employees kind of sending someone in to check on your employees is really important, because people are surprised by how they react. But generally, The effects of trauma can look like absenteeism, poor presentation, lack of focus at work, people are not turning things in, people are not engaging, right? Or just more accidents. And then that's kind of when you do see some emotional instability at work. And so that can be when you notice somebody is getting more agitated or frustrated, and you're not really sure if it's about work, is it about something at home, but you just definitely see less composure in a person, right? And that's what trauma does. It disrupts your everyday. It makes the functional dysfunctional. And so we're talking about ways where it's not just a simple stressor, it's very much something that affects everything about what you do. And it's not often controllable. And so part of today, right, we're not talking about turning everyone into medical or mental health professionals, but as HR, you are in a leadership position. So you are able to look out for these things and also make sure that your workplace is a psychologically safe place. And if not, what are the ways to get there and how to do that? So generally, when we talk about just stress and the brain in distress, it's natural for some of your cognitions to go offline. So when you're under duress, your brain's going to do, and your body, but they're both going to do whatever they can to survive. And so that means it's going to turn off some of your functioning so that you can put all your energy towards surviving. So what does that mean for when you're communicating with other people or, you know, trying to problem solve? It means that it's less likely to react logically or just react on rationale. Your emotions are going to be fairly intense or very numb, and it's going to be hard to focus. That's just what the brain does. So if you've ever seen someone under extreme stress or duress, you might notice that they're making quite odd decisions, or you can't really logically think through what they're deciding to do, or maybe their actions. And that's because that's the brain reacting under stress. So part of why I'm talking about this is to normalize that it's not, you know, when you hear like the fight, flight, freeze, it's not, well, I'm going to choose fight or I'm going to choose flight. For a lot of people, it's not necessarily your choice. It's just instinct. So to normalize, if someone's undergoing a huge amount of stress or trauma, their body and brain are going to react in ways that they can't necessarily predict. And so that's why it's a good time if you notice somebody acting a little out of character for them, or maybe someone who's more mild-tempered has been, you know, getting in a lot of fights at work or lots of agitation, or now has HR complaints. You know, that's a lot of evidence to say something is going on and they might not be in control of that. So what support do we need to offer? You know, do we need to send them to Canopy for counseling, or do we need to get them a number for something? But this is to normalize that trauma and stress, the whole aspect of it is how it is dysfunctional for you. And so it's not something that you could just power through. But I do know that at least in American culture, that's an ideal that we have. No matter what's happening, you power through. So I'm seeing some questions, so I'm going to take a little pause. Let's see. So someone is saying, aren't we all in a trauma response environment right now, considering the last 2 years? Yes. I would say 100% yes. Especially because it was a worldwide event. And so even, let's say if there's somebody that did not lose any family members to COVID, did not lose any friends, right? You probably lost something, and that can result in trauma. We experienced a worldwide trauma, a national trauma, family trauma, individual. So for a lot of people right now, I think most people would say that they're not feeling as great as they were maybe 3.5 years ago, or they've noticed they really had to buckle down on their self-care and their mental health. You know, counseling skyrocketed during the pandemic because people understood they could not cope on their own. So honestly, I'm not sure when our worldwide and national trauma response will stop, but people have been changing their actions and changing how they engage with others due to that very high level of stress that has remained consistent. but yes, good question. Okay, so these questions are specifically about the environment and kind of assessing psychological safety in your workplace. And so we'll just go through some of these and just mentally in your mind kind of check them off, yes or no, and seeing, hey, could we do more work here? So do HR and leadership communicate about employee strengths or just when problems occur? And this is important because it's important to know, as an employee, like my supervisors, my leaders, my CEO, they don't just talk to us when we're being, when we have punitive conversations or only when we did something wrong, right? It's about the types of reinforcement that HR has. Do they ever reach out to celebrate employees? Do they ever reach out to say, hey, this person's been here so long, it's their anniversary, let's celebrate them? Or do you feel like most of the emails that are sent are about, you did this wrong, or we need to talk about this, or here's a complaint, right? Secondly, does my organization offer learning opportunities about trauma? Now, for a lot of organizations, this might be a no, because trauma is still kind of coming in as this newer buzzword, and larger organizations are working on, okay, how do we get this done? So, you might see some things in larger orgs, but in smaller ones, like we haven't had that conversation yet, and that's okay. But it's a good question to ask. Just like someone said, we've all been in this trauma for 2 years now. So how is your workplace going to acknowledge that this situation is not typical, right? That it's dysfunctional and people have felt more and more dysfunctional. The workplace, our jobs erupted in 2020 and have changed since then. So even if your organization doesn't offer particular trainings on trauma or things to acknowledge that, at least here's where you could say, we acknowledge that we have to shift policies due to this worldwide trauma that we all experienced. Next, do HR and leadership turn awareness of trauma into documented action? So this is kind of when we ask leadership, when we ask HR, CEOs, when you learn about things that are not working for your employees, do you make observable actions, right? Do you make change that they can see? Do you document that you are now aware of something that, could have been psychologically unsafe, and now you've done something to change that, or you've added more mental health awareness weeks during the year, or maybe once a month, right? So it's really, really important that as we talk today, what we talk about aren't just words, or else what's the point of this webinar, right? We want to create more psychological safety, so that means taking some ideas and listening to the people that populate your organization and asking them what can be changed, because they're going to offer a lot of good input. But finding ways to document for yourselves and for the whole organization, like, yes, we have worked on this, that's going to increase retention and trust that your employees are safe and they can come to you with things. So do HR and leadership value employees' choices? So going into that same vein, it's, do employees have choices at your work, right? There are some organizations where everything is structured so much, the only choices you have are, whether to use a sick day or PTO, but there's less choice on, okay, here's my strength, so I want to work on that, or if there's a project that I need more help with, I can ask for that help and it will be received. So kind of checking in on, do you know what your employees' values are, and do you base their work and your structure around their strengths? If they could choose how to do the workday and still get things done, right, still have production, would you match? And so that's kind of a good way to assess, does leadership have a different value than employees, and really checking in on, are you creating a space for employees to thrive? Because if they're not thriving, then the organization is not going to thrive as well. And so even as we're talking about this, right, here's where the person-centered comes in. Here's where you're asking yourself as leadership, are we listening? Do we know what to do? Do we need more input? And here's where you're asking of your employees, We need more of you. You know, we want to create this for you, so please give us details or ideas. That's where the person-centered is coming from. It's not looking at an employee as a product or performance. It's seeing them as a human being. And we're talking about trauma-informed care and talking about what we have all experienced in the past, 2.5 years or more, and understanding that trauma changes a person's brain, it changes their body, it's changing the workplace. That's more person-centered than saying, we did it like this 5 years ago, so we're going to do it like this today, right? That rigidity does not necessarily increase retention or production or performance. It makes it harder to adjust and have flexibility for natural ways of change. So are a diversity of perspectives welcomed? So this is asking, looking at your population, is there a diversity of thoughts, backgrounds, skills, creativity? Because if you're working, or you have a organization that works in teams a lot, having that diversity is going to help you with more creative ideas for problem solving. If everyone has the same viewpoint and the same brain, your problem solving, yes, it might be streamlined, but you're going to have less solutions to try out, right? You're going to have less ideas to try. So where are you getting your applicants from? Where are you getting those, future employees from? And do you have a diversity of perspectives to make sure that not only do people understand that, they are welcome there, right? If they disagree or what have you, but can you also teach people to have cohesion even when there are different ideas? I think making sure that you have people from different backgrounds, skills, even different degrees as part of their background, right? To make sure that it's a very well-rounded, cohesive, but diverse group of people. It's really helpful. Let me just check on the questions. Okay, so you're all good. And feel free, let the comments or questions flow. It's really helpful for me to engage with you. So next, does my company's mission statement accurately reflect the workplace? So this is definitely something that came up and was a huge deal during 2020 and into 2021, as people were noticing a company's mission statement was completely different than how the company functioned, or even how leadership talked about the company. So it's a very direct question, but also very helpful to be authentic and genuine. So if you do see places where the mission statement does not meet how things are, how situations actually are in your organization, then that's probably a good place to start as well. And so either you can kind of accept that they don't match and change that mission statement, or you can adjust policies and adjust behaviors in the office so that you match that mission statement. But that's a very direct and quick way to say, are we doing it? Are we doing what we said that we would? And if not, what is our response going to be? But that's the decision that HR, leadership, you have the power to do that. And also might be a good time to reach out to employees and ask, what would you add to the mission statement? What have we missed? What would you change or adjust? Because they're the people that are working there, right? And so you definitely want them to believe in what the company is saying, what their mission is, because that's part of what their job is too. And if your mission statement matches how your employees feel, how your leadership feels, that's what you can present to anyone else. For anyone that has to sell their company or their brand or their ideas, right? That looks good on you if those things match. So do HR and leadership challenge unsafe ideas and behaviors? So this could be, there's so many different versions of unsafe, but when we're talking about psychological safety, this is about any behaviors or ideas or comments that make people feel like they shouldn't be there, that they're not qualified enough, that somehow, like when people say, I don't know how you got this job, right? Even things like that. But of course, going back to any harassment, any discrimination, any bullying, anything like that, those things need to be challenged, and they need to be challenged in a timely manner by HR and leadership, because when they are not, that tells employees on one half, it tells them that's not important enough for leadership to pay attention to, or that's not important enough to be addressed in a workplace, right? And that also tells other people that engage in those behaviors that, wow, I could do this at work. Like, this is the type of workplace where this is okay. So it's very, very important that either HR knows how to handle situations like that, or they get together now to make sure that they can handle any HR complaint or unsafe behavior in a timely manner, right? Because it's very, very difficult to repair that sense of safety in the workplace if you've waited way too long, right? And depending on how many people are in an organization, everyone's going to have a different answer on how soon you should respond. But I would say even for an organization that's very, very large, so let's say they have 15,000 employees, it should not take 2 weeks for HR to reach out back to that person, right? I would say within a week, honestly, that would be my example. Within a week, reach out to that person, address the complaint, and address how you think you would like to handle it, or we will have a meeting on that. But oh, good, some questions. But I think to kind of engage with you a little bit more, what would you think would be an appropriate response if HR heard of an unsafe idea or behavior, and what would be the timely response for you or your company to reach out? What do you think? 3 days, a week, 2 weeks, 1 day, and I'll wait for your responses. Any ideas? Okay, so I'm seeing a couple. So maybe somebody said 3 days. Okay, someone says 24 to 48 hours, very quick. All right. And maybe also thinking, if you were the person that was on the opposite end of the unsafe idea or behavior, how soon would you want HR or leadership or somebody in power to reach out to you? Okay, 48 hours. Someone said immediately. I do like that. Within a week. So yeah, if you really do think about it, you want to be validated that what happened was inappropriate for work. And the longer that takes for HR to reach out, whoever that employee is or whoever the group of people, they're going to feel a little left without any answers, right? Because you need to validate, hey, this was not okay, and we're going to take care of it. That's how you create the safety. It's not just, oh man, that was so hard, we're going to think about it, but it's like, wow, that was not okay for the workplace, and we are acknowledging that, and we're going to take care of it. So the two-parter there. Okay, and then lastly, are differing experiences celebrated as strengths? So before, what I talked about, like person-centered and wanting a diversity of perspectives, just differing backgrounds, are those seen as strengths in your company? And so that's a good time to look at the population and say, do we all look the same, or do we look different? Do we all have the same educational background? Did we come from different backgrounds? Do we all speak the same language, or do we have people that have different languages? So that ability to just diversify how you think, how you speak, that's going to allow you to get way more access and creativity into problem solving, into thinking, how do we address more? And obviously I don't know what each of your companies do, but what's helpful is if you do have an organization that has to reach out to different populations, if you're reaching out to somebody, make sure that you have at least one person that relates or can help represent some of the ideas from that population, or reach out to them specifically. But when you feel like, if you have an identity and you have to do work for another identity, but you don't know any of the values, you don't know anything about the culture, that's hard and extra work on you, and there's going to be spots that are missed, right? There's going to be things off target. So in your work population, do you feel like you have different people that you can go to that might answer the same question differently? because that's going to give you a wider set of perspectives and a bigger creativity for any problem solving that you might have or working in teams. Okay, let's pause for a question. Okay, so it says, are there guides available for dealing with the intersection of two people's trauma causing issues in the workplace? Good question. You know, I'm sure there is, but I'm not sure if it's, you know, huge and branded and published yet. But I think when you do have two people's traumas, the very important thing is to make sure that you identify both, you validate both, and then they might have different ways to problem solve that. They might be coping in different ways, right? So being able to first identify and address, that's going to be very, very huge. And then saying, hey, you know, we've noticed this. This might be a good time to contact a counselor, or this might be a good time to do mediation, depending on how they react, right? Because there are some people that are going to have trauma and they might not know that they're reacting in the workplace. So finding someone who can competently address that for them, or helping them just get some support. So hopefully that answered that question, but it is very difficult because two people's traumas are going to be really different. And, you know, even in counseling, it's very much, how can we view yours as the individual and see that as unique and take care of that as an individual matter. But if you do see in the workplace, like people can't work on teams, or it's causing tension in a meeting, then that's just a good time to say, hey, we've noticed this. Are you doing anything about it? Would you like help with that, right? So always offering different options because they might be unaware. But make sure you find someone who feels confident and comfortable to address that. Okay, so some opportunities to foster growth. So we kind of talked about what challenges might be present in the environment, or, you know, how do you create that psychological safety? And here are some really direct ways that HR and leadership can address this in the workplace and specifically with their employees. So first, encouraging resilience. And when we talk through all of this, honestly, as leaders, this is a good time to model how you would like your employees to kind of feel and act in the workplace, especially with the trauma that we've had to go through in the workforce. You know, modeling resilience is really, really important, and encouraging it. And so just some things to think about on what is resilience, or how would I explain this? Here are some key points, but mental agility. So we've been talking about the flexibility in your mind, being creative. And so this is kind of what that's about. So just being able to adjust to things. Everyone had to adjust because of the pandemic. So being able to model, hey, those are good skills to have, right? Here's how we do it. Here's how you as employees can do that. And as a company, you can stay resilient for whatever comes in the future, right? It's very unpredictable, but you can have a certain sense of certainty because you have those skills as a company. And then self-awareness. So paying attention to thoughts, behaviors, emotions. This can definitely be taught, right? There are trainings on mindfulness that you can set your company up with. But the ability to practice mindfulness in the workplace first makes it easier for individuals to cope, makes it less likely that they're going to bring any stress from home directly into a communal workspace. And it makes it easier for when they are struggling, just to say, hey, my brain's been going 50 miles an hour. I need to take a break right now, or just anything like that. So any mindfulness that your employees can practice and that you can practice, it helps to create a more cohesive environment for psychological safety, because people are being taken care of. Either they're taking care of themselves or they're asking for that support. And that's where the self-regulation comes in, is once you're mindful of, okay, something's going on, or I'm really stressed, or I cannot focus, it's saying, what do I need in this moment to, make it to the next moment, or do I need to take a break, or to get through this meeting? And so it's figuring out what each person needs. And so I really do recommend having a mindfulness training at your work, because even though, we're in the Pacific Northwest, so mindfulness is a big topic, yoga, meditation, breathing, all of that, that I think people sometimes leave that out of their work. And so it's a good time to model and encourage, oh no, this is all part of it, right? This is part of being a human, being able to cope when they're stressed, being able to decompress and not wait until the end of the day, but maybe taking breaks in the middle of the day to do that. Because that's going to increase like your work performance and things like that. Optimism. So it'd be a good time to notice on your teams, you know, who seems to be the optimist, and kind of just checking in, how do we focus on what our work goals are? Because it's hard to do that if you feel like you're sitting in negativity, or if the space has a lot of tension or negativity. It's going to be hard to focus. People's bodies can feel that tension. They might not be able to acknowledge it or communicate it verbally, but your body is going to feel it. And so what are ways in which you can focus on the positive, what your goals are, what's going right, and celebrating those so that you can move through times of tension. Next, strength of character. So this is kind of part of the person-centered approach of asking your employees, you know, what are their strengths? How can we outline those, celebrate those, highlight them, right? And then also asking, what are some challenges that you might have in the workplace? So getting to know them better. I think this was a huge thing about a couple years ago when workplaces were really putting emphasis on the Enneagram. So they were looking at people's personality types and asking, well, how do you add to the workplace? Kind of what's your role in that? And so if there's any organizations that still use the Enneagram, then you're probably already doing this, but I think it's a good, on a basic level, it's a good thing to ask employees, what are some of your strengths as you're working here? And then what are some challenges? Because HR leadership, you can address those challenges, especially if it's about the environment, right? If it's about the environment being psychologically unsafe. And then lastly, there's connection. So obviously this can be very, very important for companies that use a lot of teams working together, making sure that, you know, your employees can work cohesively so that you're not working twice as hard to get the same output. And so really checking in, do you have bonding exercises or activities? Are there ways for your coworkers to get to know each other better? And as coworkers, right, as employees too. So in the workplace, can you work well with others? You know, it's great if you can make friends with them, but can you actually work with them? And kind of looking at those strengths and challenges and pairing people up on teams, that might be one way to do that. But kind of getting to know how you would like them to work and getting to know them more is helpful. And that's kind of just a start on the resiliency part. Okay, so modeling self-compassion, which also been a huge buzzword. So this webinar is filled with buzzwords because mental health has just been booming. Workplaces are actually interested in it now, so it's a good time to talk about some things that people have been practicing for, you know, decades, centuries. But self-compassion is really important because people that are critical in the workplace often do not perform their best work. So how are employees seeing HR and leadership value self-compassion, compassion for selves and others, right? How do you model that? How do you model the person-centered approach that you're not just a number, you're not just an employee that could be replaced, right? But we care about you as a person. So we all react differently to distress, which means that we need to be extremely flexible when it comes to people's trauma responses or stress responses. Like we talked about, most of the time people cannot control in the moment how they're reacting to trauma, whether it's fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And so really opening some space to flexibility of everybody is stressed. Everybody's going to react in the same way. Some people don't want to talk about it. Some people need to talk about it, and others need resources, right? So can you increase that flexibility so that if there are issues, you have much more space to problem solve than sitting in areas of, you know, high criticism or negativity or things like that. And also something that's extremely important is if people cannot offer themselves compassion, it's really, really hard to genuinely offer others compassion, because the more critical you are of yourself, the more critical you're going to be of other people. And that just does not work in group, communal, team settings, right? And that might feel uncontrollable to them, like it's unconscious, but that criticism does take a toll, and it's definitely going to affect the work, right? That's when you might see somebody working on a project 2 hours past than when they finish, because they don't think it's just right yet, or they're worried that someone will view it as subpar. So being able to offer a sense of self-compassion, like I worked really hard, this is okay, can I check in with somebody else on this? Am I overthinking? Am I overreacting? But offering a space where that's not strange or out of the norm, but rather that is completely normalized. And also, no one is perfectly resilient. Perfect is just not a word that most people can grasp and hold on to, because it's very unattainable for human beings. Human beings are naturally imperfect. And so that sense of 100% all the time, that can lead you to burnout. That could lead you to feeling unmotivated at work. That could lead you to feeling like just a number, because you're always striving for something that's unattainable. And so please, when you're talking to people or modeling self-compassion, if you do find someone who's falling into that trap of just fix it, just fix it, just fix it, I would probably ask them, like, do you need a break right now? And that might be, so strange for them to hear. But I think it's helpful to push past that perfectionist cycle so that you can actually get some honest and genuine work done without all the overthinking. Any questions on perfectionism? Because I normally get a lot of questions on those. If you do have any thoughts, please add them and I will address them. But perfectionism is something that our culture does really well as highlighting as the gold standard, and then everyone falls below it. So if there's anything that you could do at your workplace to recognize, hey, we're not looking for perfect, we're looking for your best work for that day, you might have people asking more questions, actually spending more creative time on something because they're excited rather than, nervous about bringing in something subpar. So this slide, this is one of the slides that I think is really helpful to send out to employees or to print out, put it in the break room where the printer is, in the bathroom. This is a good way to practice mindfulness and moment around emotion. And so if you notice that somebody is, acting a little differently or they seem on edge, asking them or giving them this paper and saying, practice this, take like 5 minutes, right? It's directly guided processing of what's going on for me. Can I even name it? I'm at work right now, so can I just accept this and kind of process it later? What do I need to do so I can get back to work and be able to communicate with others? Okay, I think this also would be a good one to print out just because it's easy, pretty self-explanatory, and if people, at work want to create some space for self-care or they need to take a minute, they can look down this list and kind of choose one. But I think this would be helpful, especially in your workplace and whether you're on site or virtual. But if you're on site, if you have any place in the office or in the entire building where if somebody is needing to slow down or go to a quiet space, you actually have a room for that. So in some places, like where I used to work, they had a room with a massage chair, it had the aromatherapy, it had a dimmer so you could lower the lights, it had this like running fountain. So basically a sensory room where if somebody needed to go to relax or in between meetings, they could go there and really decompress, emotionally, physically, things like that. So maybe that's something to talk to leadership about. Do we have a place where if someone is extremely stressed during that day or they're not able to cope on their own, they can go to this like smaller, quiet, more private space to just get that privacy, to rest, to come down? Because it's really, really difficult if you feel like you're having any type of emotional crises to work throughout the day and say, I will finish it later, right? That's going to impact how you communicate for the rest of the day. Yes, and if you need to create a sensory room in your home office or in your home, please do that. For some people, their space is out in the garden, or maybe they kind of turn their garage into a space. So even at your home, that'd be a really great idea. Okay, so one of my favorite things to talk about is self-advocacy, because I think it's really important for communication to communicate and share, what do I need? How can my, organization help me? And so when we talk about resilience, here's where it's about the individual, right? So encouraging resilience, encouraging employees to share what their needs are and advocate, how could I make this workplace better for me? How could this workplace be better for my team, right? If you have managers. And so encouraging self-advocacy leads to better communication, because they trust and believe that you'll listen to them when they come to you. And that's really important for employee retention, and just making sure that people want to show up to work more, right? There's still going to be some people that are like, why am I working 5 days a week? But if they feel like they can come to you with adjustments or changes, that's going to keep them, rather than this place will never change, I better not say anything at all. So some questions that are good examples maybe to share with employees, or saying, hey, if you need to talk with somebody or kind of bring up something in a meeting, you could start with this. So this is one thing that would help me be more successful in my role, right? Straight to the point, it's work focused, and it's kind of productivity focused, so that's always helpful. How would you like me to prioritize my tasks? So this is a very important question, because it's saying at that point in time, you might be overwhelmed with the number of things that you have to do. So if you're talking to a supervisor or manager, how would you like me to prioritize, knowing that I cannot do all of these at one time? So it's kind of saying two things in one. Who should I talk to if I need more clarification on work assignments? So also encouraging that you're not just doing your work by yourself, right? There's space to ask for help, and there's also space to say, I might need some time on this. And then lastly, here is one thing that would help me feel less burned out. Extremely important. If people at your work are talking about feeling burnt out, that is a good time for the company, for leadership, HR to step in and say, what can we do? Because when people are burnt out, not only are they less able to communicate with most anyone in their life, whether it's in and out of work, but their work performance really goes down. Their ability to stay on topic or focus really goes down, and any motivation for future projects, that's going to go down too. So I would pay attention and keep your ears open for whether you feel like people are burned out, and maybe that's a good time to send out a survey just to ask and say, ooh, what might help with this, right? We cannot change it all for you, but the workplace, they're spending at least 40 hours there, or in that workspace capacity. That's a lot, and so you can really impact for the betterment of somebody's mental health. So I love this quote by Dr. Cindy Pace: leadership is an action and not a position. So in your roles, you have a lot of power to change things. You have a lot of power to create more psychological safety and to address where there are some barriers to that, or where there are some unsafe ideas. So please take these positions seriously. There's a reason that you're here. There's a reason that people are asking these questions. And so from today, whatever ideas that you've had or that you've heard from others, right, take those with you, because you're in a position of power. It might not feel like it if you're in a huge organization, but do know that speaking up does change things, because the more that you speak up, the more that other people will see that that's okay, that their ideas are okay and valid, even if it doesn't work. That's where the psychological safety is, even for HR employees. It's being able to share and knowing that you're not ridiculed or ignored or things like that. So please take it seriously that you have that power and you can make things better for your employees. So that is the end. If there's any more questions, I can answer those. If not, thank you so much for being here. It was really engaging, and I hope that you all have a good day and get to take some of these ideas with you and have fuller conversations. So I'll be here for questions. If not, have a good day. You're welcome. Yeah.